The corridor outside the library had always been cold, even in high summer, and Morena Ashcombe pressed her palm flat against the stone to steady herself. She had not meant to stop here. She had meant only to fetch the embroidery hoop she had left on the writing desk, to carry it back to the morning room where her sister-in-law waited, and to pass the rest of the afternoon pretending she was not unraveling. But the library door stood ajar, and through the narrow gap she could hear her husband's voice, and she could hear that he was laughing. Theodoric Ashcombe, 7th Duke of Wolverberry, did not laugh often. In the 3 years she had been his wife, she had counted his laughter the way a miser counts coins, and hoarding each instance as evidence that she was not entirely a stranger to him. He laughed once at a joke his secretary made about a lame horse. He laughed once when a footman dropped a silver tray during Christmas dinner. He laughed once, very softly, when she had misquoted a line of Greek at breakfast, and he had corrected her, and she had blushed to the roots of her hair. That was 3 laughs in 3 years. She knew because she had counted. He was laughing now, and she did not recognize the sound of it. It was lower, looser, the laugh of a man who believed himself alone with someone he trusted. "Oh, come now, Aldrich," said her husband. "You cannot seriously expect me to pretend I chose her for any other reason." Morena did not move. Another voice answered, and she knew it at once. Lord Aldrich Pendry, Theodoric's closest friend, a man who had stood beside her at the wedding and kissed her gloved hand and called her sister. He said, "I never accused you of pretending, Wolverberry. I only asked whether you still find the arrangement tolerable." Tolerable. Her husband rolled the word around as though it were a new vintage. Tolerable is a generous word, Pendry. Let us call it endurable. She is quiet, she is biddable, and she does not interfere. She runs the household without complaint. She writes the correspondence I have no patience for. She is pleasant enough at table. High praise. It is all the praise a man can afford for a wife he did not choose. There was a silence, and then the clink of a decanter against glass. Morena felt the particular coldness of the corridor moving up through the thin soles of her slippers and into her ankles and knees. She thought, "Move. You must move. If you stand here any longer, you will hear something you cannot unhear." She did not move. "And yet," said Aldrich Pendry, "no son." "No son," her husband agreed. "Not yet." 3 years. 3 years, yes, I am aware. The estate passes to your cousin Rawnsley if you die without an heir. You cannot have forgotten that. I forget nothing about Rawnsley. Rawnsley is the reason I agreed to the match. My father left me a dukedom and a cousin who would bankrupt it within a season. Morena Ashcombe is my insurance against that. So she is a brood mare in a good bonnet. Theodoric laughed again, and this time the sound was terrible. Pendry, you are crude. She is a perfectly respectable woman from a perfectly respectable family, and I have no complaint to make of her. I married her because she came with a dowry large enough to repair the West Wing and a pedigree clean enough to satisfy my mother. I will keep her until she bears a son, and then I will be considerably more relaxed about the business of being a husband. That is the arrangement. That is what the arrangement was, always. She knows it. I know it. Her father knew it when he signed the settlements. And if she does not bear a son? Then she bears a daughter, and we try again, and eventually the thing is settled one way or the other. It is not a romance, Pendry. It is husbandry. Morena closed her eyes. It had been a romance to her. She had never said so. She had never been foolish enough to say so. But she had allowed herself, in the quiet of her dressing room, in the long evenings when he did not come to her door, in the mornings when he nodded to her across the breakfast table and returned to his newspaper, to believe that the silence between them was the silence of a man who did not yet know how to say what he felt. She had believed that if she was patient, if she was useful, If she made herself small and quiet and necessary, he would one day look up from the paper and see her. She had believed it for 3 years. I will keep her until she bears a son. The phrase sat inside her like a swallowed stone. You are unfair to her, said Aldrich Pendry, and Morena almost loved him for it, until he went on. She is not ugly, Wolverberry. She is not stupid. She might, if you gave her the slightest encouragement, become genuinely fond of you. And a fond wife is a useful wife. I do not require her to be fond of me. I require her to do her duty. And if she does not, then I shall have to be a great deal more attentive, shan't I? They laughed together, and the sound was the sound of 2 men discussing the training of a horse. Morena took 1 step back from the door, and then another, and then she turned, and she walked very slowly down the corridor, with her hand pressed hard against the wall, because she did not trust her legs to carry her without it. She did not go to the morning room. She did not fetch the embroidery hoop. She climbed the stairs to her own rooms, and she closed the door, and she sat down on the edge of the bed, with her hands folded in her lap, as though she were a child waiting to be called down to supper. Her eyes were dry, and her face was very still, and what she felt, underneath the stone in her chest, wasn't grief. It was something colder and more useful. She had been raised in the north, on her father's estate at Thornhallow. Her father had been a scholar and a poor manager of money, and her mother had died when she was 9. She had been 22 when the offer came from Wolverberry. Her father had wept with relief, and had told her that Theodoric Ashcombe was a serious and honorable man, and that the match would save them all. She had not loved her husband on their wedding day. She had not expected to, but she had decided, walking up the aisle of the chapel at Wolverberry Court, that she would try. That was the promise she had made to herself, not to be loved, only to try. She had tried for 3 years. She had learned the names of every tenant on the estate. She had taught herself to embroider, because he had once admired a cushion his mother had made. She had taught herself the history of his family, because he had once said, offhandedly, that a duchess ought to know the line she had married into. She had done all of this quietly. She had never asked him to notice. And now she understood that he had not noticed because he had never intended to. I will keep her until she bears a son. Morena stood up. She walked to the washstand and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. She washed her hands, slowly, finger by finger, as though she were preparing for a very important task. She looked at her own face in the small oval mirror above the washstand, and she saw a young woman of 25, pale and brown-haired and unremarkable, with gray eyes that her father had once called kind. She studied the face in the mirror, and she thought, very clearly and very calmly, "You have been a fool." The face in the mirror did not disagree. She pinned a loose curl back into place. She smoothed the front of her gown. She turned from the mirror, and she walked to her writing desk, and she sat down, and she picked up her pen, and she did not write anything for a long moment. Then she set the pen down. She did not know yet what she was going to do. She knew only that the woman who had walked up the corridor an hour ago was gone, and the woman who had walked back down was not going to bear anyone a son until she understood what she was going to do with the rest of her life. A knock came at the door, her maid's voice soft and apologetic. "Your Grace, her ladyship asks if you are coming down to tea." Morena did not turn. She said very evenly, "Tell her I have a headache. Tell her I shall not come down." "Yes, Your Grace." Footsteps retreated along the corridor. Somewhere below, very faintly, she heard the sound of male laughter in the library. She heard it as though it were coming from underwater, and she heard it very clearly. She picked up her pen again. She still did not write, but she had begun to think. She did not come down to supper either. The maid came again at 7 to ask whether her Grace would like a tray, and Morena said yes, and when the tray arrived, she ate half a piece of bread and drank 2 cups of tea and left the rest. She sat by the window with the curtains drawn back and watched the long summer twilight settle across the park, the slow fade from gold to rose to lavender, to the particular gray-blue that always made her think of her mother's best silk. She did not think about her husband. That was the first discipline she set for herself. She had spent 3 years thinking about her husband, wondering what he wanted for breakfast, wondering whether the letter she had sent to his mother had struck the right tone, wondering whether she ought to wear the pearl earrings or the garnet ones. Every thought she had possessed for 3 years had been bent, in some small way, toward the question of how to be a better Duchess for Theodoric Ashcombe. She was finished with that question. What she thought about instead was herself. She thought about the girl she had been at 16, before her mother died, before the money ran out, before her father's library had to be sold piece by piece to pay the grocer. That girl had wanted to study Greek. That girl had wanted to travel to Rome. That girl had kept a notebook of observations about the birds that nested in the hawthorn hedge at Thornhallow, and she had planned, in a private and serious way, to write a natural history of the Yorkshire moors when she grew up. Morena had not thought about that notebook in years. She did not know where it was. She suspected it had been left behind when she packed for Wolverberry, abandoned in a drawer with her other childish things. She thought, I would like to find it again. It was such a small thought and so foolish that she almost laughed. But she did not laugh, because she was afraid that if she began to laugh, she would not stop, and she did not want the maid to hear. The clock in the corridor struck 10. She heard her husband's tread on the stair, slow and deliberate, and she heard it pass her door without pausing, and she heard his door shut. He had not come to her door in 11 nights. She had been counting that too. She rose from the window and went to her desk and lit the candles, and she took out her pen, and this time she began to write. She wrote to her father. She wrote to ask after his health, and the new curate, and the progress of his book on the Latin poets. At the very end, in a postscript, she wrote, Papa, do you happen to know what became of the old green notebook I kept as a girl? The one with the drawings of the hawthorn birds. I find myself wanting it rather suddenly. She sealed the letter. She set it on the tray for the morning post. She sat for a long time looking at the flame of the candle. She thought, he said he would keep me until I bear a son. She thought, what if I do not bear him one? The thought arrived quietly, and once it had arrived, she could not make it leave. She had spent 3 years trying to conceive. It had not happened. She had blamed herself, because that was what a woman did. She had consulted an elderly physician in Harrogate, who had told her gravely that the womb was a delicate instrument, and that a lady of nervous temperament sometimes failed to quicken. She had paid him 3 guineas and taken his advice, and continued not to conceive. But perhaps, she thought now, the failure was not hers, or perhaps the failure was hers, and that was the point. She did not need to know. What she needed, she understood suddenly, was time. Time in which she wasn't trying. Time in which she was simply herself, whoever that was. The next morning she came down to breakfast at the usual hour. She wore her blue muslin. She greeted her husband with the small, polite smile she had greeted him with every morning for 3 years, and she answered his inquiry about her headache with a quiet, quite recovered, I thank you. And she saw, because she was watching him now, the way a hunter watches the tree line, that he did not look at her. He had never looked at her. She saw this clearly now. For 3 years he had been addressing the space where she sat, and she had been addressing him, and she had mistaken the arrangement for a marriage because she had not known what marriages were supposed to look like. And in the privacy of her own mind, in the small and newly quiet room of her own attention, Morena Ashcombe began, for the first time in her life, to plan. Lord Aldrich Pendry's sister arrived on Thursday in a traveling carriage of such determined newness that the varnish still smelled of the workshop. Her name was Lady Corisande Pendry. She was 23 years old. She had been the toast of 2 London seasons, and she crossed the threshold of Wolverbury Court as though she had been born there and were returning after a regrettable absence. Morena met her in the hall. She wore her second-best day dress, the pale gray with the dove-colored ribbon, because she had decided that morning that she would begin, in very small ways, to dress for herself rather than for her husband's approval. The gray was not a color Theodric liked. He had said so once in passing, and she had put it away. She had taken it out again that morning and laid it on the bed and looked at it for a long time before she rang for the maid. "Duchess," said Lady Corisande, dropping the smallest permissible curtsy. "How charming to meet you at last. Aldrich speaks of you so often I feel I know you already." "You are very welcome," said Morena. "Such a pretty hall, and so many portraits. I counted 14 dukes on the staircase alone." "7 dukes," said Morena gently. "The others are younger sons." Lady Corisande laughed, a light, practiced sound, and Morena understood at once that the laugh had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. She understood it because she had rehearsed laughs in front of a mirror herself in her first weeks at Wolverbury, trying to find a laugh that would not embarrass her husband. "How clever of you to know them all apart. Is His Grace at home?" "In the library, I believe. Shall I send word?" "Oh, don't disturb him on my account. I shall see him at dinner. Aldrich told me you preferred the country. I think that shows great wisdom in a young wife." The young slid in very neatly, like a knife between 2 ribs. Morena smiled as though she had not felt it. "Supper is at 7. If there is anything you require, please send for me and not for the housekeeper." "How kind. Aldrich did tell me you were kind." She swept up the staircase in a cloud of traveling dust and French perfume, and Morena stood in the hall watching her go, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "He means to marry her. Not now. In 2 years. In 3. When I have failed him thoroughly enough." It was not a jealous thought. Morena was interested to find that she wasn't jealous. She was, perhaps, a naturalist observing a new species. She had watched the hawthorn birds at Thornhallow when she was a girl, and she had learned that if one sat very still and did not interpret what one saw, one could learn the habits of a creature in a single afternoon. She applied the same discipline now. She watched Lady Corisande ascend the staircase, and she did not interpret. She only noticed. She noticed that Lady Corisande had glanced once, very quickly, at the portrait of the 7th Duke on the first landing. Theodric's portrait. She had glanced at it, and she had looked away, and she had not looked at any of the other portraits on the stair. Morena turned and walked slowly toward the morning room. Her husband found her there an hour later. He came in without knocking, which was his habit, and he stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame. "You have met Lady Corisande." "I have." "And?" "She is very accomplished." He looked at her for a moment, as though he had expected something more. "Yes. Aldrich is fond of her. I hope you will make her comfortable here." "I always try to make our guests comfortable, Theodric." "Yes, well, I shall see you at supper." He left. Morena stayed where she was. Her hands were very steady in her lap. On the small table beside her sat the sewing basket she had been using for the past 3 years, and in the basket was the cushion cover she had been embroidering for her husband's birthday, which was in September. She had chosen the design herself, a wreath of bay leaves and small ducal strawberries, and she had been working on it in stolen quarter hours for 6 months. She picked up the cushion cover. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in the basket, and she closed the lid, and she did not pick it up again. She rang for the maid. "Janet," she said when the girl appeared. I should like to have tea in the small parlor this afternoon, and I should like you to find me a book. Anything from the library. Something I have not read before. And Janet, if His Grace asks where I am, tell him I am reading." The maid hesitated. In 3 years, Morena had never sent such a message. In 3 years, she had always been available, always where she had said she would be, always within reach. "Yes, Your Grace," Janet said, and curtsied, and went. Morena sat alone in the morning room with the closed sewing basket beside her, and she looked out of the window at the long green sweep of her husband's park, and she thought, with no particular pleasure and no particular grief, "It has begun." She did not yet know what it was. She knew only that somewhere in the next weeks or months a door would open, and she intended to be the one standing closest to it when it did. The rain began on Saturday morning and did not stop for 3 days. It was the sort of rain that flattened the late roses in the garden and turned the drive to a brown ribbon and made the servants ill-tempered in the kitchens. It kept the house party indoors. Lord Aldrich Pendry played billiards with the Duke in the long gallery. Lady Corisanda Pendry read aloud from a book of sermons in the drawing room, in a voice calibrated for an audience twice the size of the one she had. Morena sat near the window with her own book open in her lap and did not turn the pages. She had chosen the book from the library shelf nearest the door. It was a treatise on crop rotation by a gentleman farmer in Norfolk. The gentleman farmer wrote with the patient authority of a man who had spent 40 years watching barley grow. She read 3 pages and understood less than half of what she read, and she found that she did not mind. "Morena," said her husband, who had entered the drawing room without her noticing, "you are reading a treatise on turnips. On the rotation of crops, Theodoric, which, in this particular volume, concerns itself almost entirely with turnips. Then I shall become an expert on turnips." He looked at her for a moment, with something that was not quite surprise and not quite amusement. It was the closest thing to direct attention she had received from him in a year. She turned another page of the book, very deliberately, and did not look up. "Lady Corisanda has asked if we might get up a game of whist this evening," he said. "Will you play?" "Of course." He left the room. Lady Corisanda, who had observed the exchange from the other end of the drawing room without appearing to observe it, set her sermon book aside and drifted toward the window. "Such an unusual choice of reading, Duchess. I confess I could not have managed it. Do tell me, how did His Grace choose you?" It was the sort of question that could only be asked by a woman who already believed she knew the answer. Morena closed her book, keeping her thumb between the pages. "My father and his father were at Cambridge together." "Oh, how charming. A family arrangement. And His Grace simply accepted his father's choice? How dutiful of him. I should want a husband who chose me for myself." Morena smiled. It was a small, pleasant smile that had cost her 3 years to learn. "You have not met such a husband?" "Not yet. But I am told they exist." "How fortunate for you. I hope you find one." Lady Corisande's smile faltered by perhaps a degree and recovered. "You are teasing me, Duchess." "I would not dream of teasing a guest. Do you play whist well?" "Indifferently. His Grace is an excellent player. I shall partner Lord Aldrich. But surely a wife must partner her husband at whist." "Must she? It is what is done." "Then let us do something else," said Morena, and opened her book again. Lady Corisande sat for a moment longer, and then she rose, and she drifted toward the fireplace, and she began to study the Chinese vases on the mantel with the attention of a woman who is already deciding which of them she will move when the house is hers. Morena watched her from behind the treatise on turnips. She thought, "He does not know. He does not know that his friend has brought his own replacement into the house and seated her at the breakfast table. Or he does know, and he approves." The second thought was worse than the first, and she set it down carefully. She had taken to keeping a small ledger in her writing desk, a plain folio bound in brown paper, in which she recorded each night 3 observations from the day. The observations were to be factual. They were not to contain feelings. That night, she wrote in the ledger, Lady Corisande looked at the Chinese vases as though measuring them. The Duke noticed that I was reading. He has not previously noticed. Aldrich Pendry has not spoken directly to me in 4 days. She set the pen down and blew on the ink and closed the ledger. At supper that evening, Aldrich Pendry told a story about a horse he had bought at Tattersall's, and Theodric laughed once, very briefly. Morena noticed that her husband's laugh was different when he was trying to please a guest than when he was genuinely amused. She noticed it now, as one notices a crack in a wall one has passed every day for years. After supper they played whist. Morena partnered Lord Aldrich Pendry. She played coolly and competently, as her father had taught her, and she won 3 rubbers in succession. Lady Corisande, who had declared herself an indifferent player, revealed herself across the course of the evening to be rather better than indifferent. At the end of the 4th rubber, Lady Corisande laid down her cards and said, Duchess, you are formidable. I had no notion you were such a card player. My father taught me. He said whist was a training in patience. I shall have to take lessons from you. You do not need lessons. Lady Corisande looked up. Morena held her gaze across the card table, and she smiled her small, pleasant smile, and she said, very evenly, I have enjoyed watching your play this evening. The hesitations are particularly clever. There was a silence of perhaps 2 seconds. Aldrich Pendry, who was no fool, glanced between the 2 women. Theodric, who had not been attending, said, Shall we try one more, or is it too late? Too late, I think, said Morena, and she rose from the table. Forgive me. I have a small headache. Again, said her husband. Again. She bid them all good night. She walked up the staircase, and in her own room she opened the brown ledger, and beneath the 3 observations she had written earlier, she added a 4th. She hesitates deliberately. She wishes to be underestimated. She thought for a long moment, and then she added a 5th. So do I. The rain ended on Tuesday. By Thursday, the lanes were dry enough to ride on, and by Friday morning, Lord Aldrich Pendry proposed a picnic at the Folly on the hill above the lake, and the proposal was accepted with enthusiasm by everyone except Morena, who accepted it with courteous calm and went upstairs to change into her walking boots. The Folly had been built by Theodric's grandfather as a place to admire the view. The roof was sound, and the columns were standing, but the floor was laid with moss, and the interior smelled of damp stone and owl. The servants carried up a basket of cold chicken and bread and a bottle of hock, and they spread rugs on the grass outside, and the 4 of them sat in the late September sunlight and ate and spoke of nothing in particular. Morena drank very little. She had discovered, since her observations had begun, that she did not wish her attention dulled. Duchess, said Lord Aldrich Pendry, who was seated beside her on the rug, my sister tells me you beat us all soundly at whist on Saturday. Only on points. She was much impressed. She is gracious. He regarded her for a moment. He was a handsome man, in the way that many of her husband's friends were handsome. She had always liked him, in the distant way one likes a portrait one passes each morning on the stairs. She found now, looking at him in the clear light of the hillside, that she did not know him at all. She had heard him laugh in the library, and that was the entire sum of her knowledge of his character. You have been rather quiet this week, have I? Quieter than usual. I did not know you noticed my usualness, he smiled. One notices more than one is given credit for, Duchess. It was a small remark, delivered lightly, and it went through her like a cold wire. She looked at him. He was still smiling. His eyes, which were a pale blue that she had not previously attended to, rested on her face with a considering interest that did not match the lightness of his tone. She thought, "He knows I heard." She thought it, and she dismissed it. There was no reason he should know. The library door had been ajar, but not wide. She had made no sound. And yet... "Lord Pendry," she said, "I wonder if you would walk me down to the lake." "With pleasure." They rose. Theodoric and Lady Coruscant looked up. Her husband's expression was perfectly neutral. Lady Coruscant's was not. "Do not be long, Duchess," said Coruscant. "I shall not be long." They walked down the hill together. For the first 100 yards, Morena did not speak. She was concentrating on the uneven ground and on the question of what she was going to say. She had not planned this. She was acting on a signal she had received without her full consent, a signal that had told her that Aldrich Pendry wasn't what she had thought he was. A man who had spoken of her as a broodmare in a good bonnet did not, a week later, draw her aside at a picnic for the pleasure of her conversation. He wanted something. The lake is very pretty in autumn. It is. I walk here in the mornings sometimes, before the house wakes. That is a solitary habit. I am a solitary person. My mother died when I was 9. My father preferred books to company. I learned to be alone. And now you are a duchess, and never alone at all. He looked sideways at her as they walked. "You are not happy, Duchess," he said, at last, quite gently. "I did not say so." "You did not have to." She did not answer. They had reached the edge of the lake, where a low stone bench had been placed for the convenience of walkers, and she sat down on it. "Lord Pendry, why did you bring your sister to this house?" He turned. For a moment he did not speak. Then he said, carefully, "She has not been to the country in some months. I thought the change would do her good." "That is not an answer. It is the answer I am prepared to give at present." "Then let me ask you differently. Do you intend your sister to be the next Duchess of Wolverberry?" His face changed. It was a small change. If she had not been watching for it, she would not have seen it. But she was watching for it, and she saw it, and she thought, "There." "Duchess, that is an extraordinary question." "It is a direct question. I should prefer a direct answer." "Your husband is very much alive and very much married to you." "I am aware. I asked after your intention, not his mortality." He turned back to the water. "You have misread the situation." "Have I?" "Coruscant is a young woman in need of distraction. That is the whole of it." "Then why did you laugh?" He turned his head sharply. "I beg your pardon." "In the library, last Friday afternoon. You were with my husband, and I was in the corridor, and I heard what the two of you said of me, and I heard both of you laugh, and I've been wondering for a week why you did." He went very still. The wind off the lake moved the loose hair at her temple, and a fish rose somewhere out in the reeds. Aldrich Pendry did not speak for what felt, to Morena, like a long time. "How much did you hear?" "All of it, from the brood mare onward. God, do not pray at me, Lord Pendry. Does he know? That I heard?" "He does not." "And you have not told him?" "No." "Why not?" She looked up at him from the bench. He had come a step closer without meaning to. She understood, with a calm that astonished her, that he was not frightened of her husband's finding out. He was frightened of her. "Because I am still deciding what I am going to do." He sat down on the bench beside her, uninvited. "Duchess, what I said in the library was crude, and I regret it. I was not serious. Your husband was not serious. Men speak to one another in such ways when they are comfortable, and they have drunk too much too early." "You wish to say that it meant nothing?" "Yes, it meant something to me." He was silent. "Tell me about your sister. Tell me what you hope for her. A good marriage? To a man of title? To my husband, if I were out of the way?" Is that not the arrangement you came to discuss with him? An understanding, for 2 years hence, if the heir is still not forthcoming. He did not answer. She had been guessing, and she saw from his face that her guesses had landed. She stood up. I have taken too much of your time, Lord Pendry. I shall walk back alone. Please. He was still sitting on the bench with his elbows on his knees, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, ashamed. Do not tell him. Not yet. Why not? Because I don't think it would go the way you imagine. And how do I imagine it? You imagine he would be sorry. She stood very still. She had not imagined that. She had not allowed herself to imagine anything about what her husband would feel. Good day, Lord Pendry. She walked back up the hill alone. Halfway up, she met her husband coming down to find her, and he said, You were a long time. And she said, The path was steeper than I remembered. And he did not look at her with any particular attention as they climbed back to the folly together, and the sun was beginning to set over the lake, and Morena Ashcombe thought, He is frightened of me. That is the first piece of ground I have ever stood on in this house. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the great curtained bed, listening to the old timbers of the house settle around her, and she turned the afternoon over in her mind. You imagine he would be sorry. She had not expected the sentence. The clock in the corridor struck 2. She rose, put on her wrapper, lit a fresh candle from the stub of the old, and crossed the room to her writing desk. What she wrote, after a long while, was a single sentence on a loose sheet of paper. What if he would be sorry? She looked at it. She did not like it. She held it in the flame of the candle until it caught, and she dropped the burning scrap into the empty grate, and she watched it blacken and curl and fall to ash. Then she went back to bed. She did not fall asleep until the gray light had begun to lift behind the curtains, and she was woken an hour later by a hammering on her door. Your Grace. His Grace sends to say the carriage has returned. What carriage? The Pendry carriage. Lord Pendry has gone. Before breakfast. He took his sister with him. To London, Your Grace. Lord Pendry left his compliments and his regrets, and his sister was weeping in the hall. Morena sat up. She dressed without ringing for Janet to help her, because her hands were unsteady, and she did not wish the girl to see them. She went down the stairs in her second-best day dress, with her hair only half-pinned, and she found her husband in the breakfast room, alone, reading a letter. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her with an attention so entirely new that she did not at first recognize it as his. It was a narrow, steady, careful look, and it traveled across her face as though he were reading her. Morena. Theodric. Sit down. She sat. He set the letter aside. Her husband folded his hands on the tablecloth. What did you say to him? At the lake. Yesterday. I asked him a question. What question? Whether he intended his sister to be the next Duchess of Wolverberry. A muscle moved in his jaw. The footman, who had been standing by the sideboard, read the room correctly and withdrew through the servants' door. They were alone. Morena. What prompted that question? His behavior. His sister's behavior. The way she looked at the Chinese vases. And from the library. His face did not change. It went, instead, extremely blank. The library. Last Friday afternoon, I came to fetch my embroidery hoop. The door was ajar. I heard what was said. All of it, Theodric. He closed his eyes. He sat for a long time with his eyes closed and his hands folded on the cloth, and Morena watched him. And she noticed that his hands were not entirely steady either. And she noticed that this was the first time in 3 years she had seen her husband's hands shake. When he opened his eyes, he did not look at her. I see. Do you? I said things I should not have said, to a man I should not have said them to, about a woman who did not deserve them. I did not know you had heard. I am sorry, Morena. Are you? Yes. She studied him. He was a serious man and a private man, and she had never heard him apologize for anything in 3 years of marriage. He had apologized now, flatly and without decoration. She understood that the apology was real. She also understood that an apology was not what she had come downstairs to receive. An apology closed a door. She was not finished opening the door. Theodric. Why did Aldrich leave? He picked up the letter. He held it out to her. She took it. She read it. Wolverberry. I have discharged my errand here as far as I am able, and I find I am not suited to continue it. My sister and I will remove to London within the hour. I have presumed upon your hospitality long enough, with apologies and continued friendship, Pendry. What errand? Was he here to propose an arrangement to you, for 2 years hence? An understanding, in the event that I continued not to provide what was required? He did not answer. She folded the letter and put it down on the cloth. I should like a truthful answer. Morena, I would not have. Not yet, you mean? Not ever. You have just told me you said in the library what you would not have said in any other room. Forgive me if I do not entirely believe not ever. He looked at her then, directly. For the first time in the conversation, and perhaps the first time in their marriage, I was a fool. I have been a fool for 3 years. I did not know you heard anything. I thought I had 3 years more of behaving as I have behaved. And then, I do not know. I did not plan that far. I was not a man who planned that far in regard to you. Why did you marry me? For the reasons I stated in the library, and for no other reason. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, at the time, for no other reason. And now? He did not answer. She waited. He did not answer. She stood up. I'm going for a walk, Theodric. Do not send anyone after me. She left him at the breakfast table with the letter folded between them and the tea cooling in the pot, and she walked down the long gravel drive in the cold September morning, and she did not stop walking until she had reached the lake, and she sat down on the stone bench where she had sat with Aldrich Pendry the day before, and she put her face in her hands. She sat with her face in her hands and she breathed, very slowly, and she thought, this is not what I was prepared for. I was prepared for him to be what he was. I was not prepared for him to be sorry. The lake was very still. A heron stood in the reeds, perfectly upright, perfectly patient, watching something she could not see. She watched it back. She did not know what she truly wanted. For 8 days, she had believed she knew. She had believed she wanted information, and then strategy, and then the quiet satisfaction of having been right about the shape of her own betrayal. She had not considered the possibility that her husband might become a person she did not yet know how to manage. You imagine he would be sorry. She had not imagined it. She had not dared. She sat on the bench for a long time. She did not yet know what she was going to do, but she understood, with the same cold, useful clarity that had arrived in her on the afternoon in the corridor, that the shape of the problem had changed. It had been a question, until this morning, of what she would do with a husband who did not love her. It was now a question of what she would do with a husband who might impossibly, inconveniently, and too late, be on the point of beginning to. She did not return to the house until mid-morning. When she came up the drive, she saw her husband standing at the window of the library, watching her. He did not move when he saw her looking back. She went inside. She went up the staircase, and she did not meet him that day. She sent word that she would take her meals in her rooms, and he sent word that he would respect her wish. And between noon and evening, 3 small notes were brought up by Janet. The first said only, I am here when you wish to speak. The second said, I have written to Pendry. The matter he came to discuss is closed. The third said, there was never an arrangement. There was only a conversation. I did not know at the time that the distinction would matter. I know it now. She kept the third note. She burned the other two. She spent the afternoon at her writing desk. She drew on a blank page the outline of a heron standing in reeds. The heron was not a good heron. She looked at it for a long time anyway. Toward evening, Janet came in with a tray and a letter. The letter was not in her husband's hand. It was in a small, sloped, feminine script that she did not recognize. The seal was Pendry. She waited until Janet had left. Then she opened it. Duchess, you will not expect to hear from me. I did not expect to write. I am writing because my brother is unhappy in a way he will not speak of, and because I have been turning over the events at Wolverberry Court, and I find I have misjudged almost everything I found there, including you. I came to your house intending to make myself agreeable to your husband. I do not think there is much use in my pretending otherwise now. My brother had given me to understand that the Duke of Wolverberry was an unhappy husband, that the Duchess was a quiet disappointment, and that the connection was of a sort which might, in the fullness of time, come to wish itself differently constituted. I understood, without the words being used, that I was being considered for a position that had not yet become vacant. I will tell you what I didn't know. I did not know that your husband would look at you, after you left the Folly on Friday, with the face of a man who has just realized he has lost something. He did not know he was looking, which is why I am able to tell you about it. I have 3 older brothers, and I have learned to read a man's face from across a room. He looked at you, as though he were watching you walk away for the last time. Aldrich saw it too. I think it is why Aldrich left. I am going to be very plain. I do not believe he meant what he said in the library, in the way he said it. I believe he meant the words, and was pleased with himself for the cleverness of them, and I believe he has not been in any room since Friday in which he has been pleased with himself for anything. I thought you should know. I am not your friend. I am not anyone's friend in this matter. I am only a woman who has observed something, and who has decided that you ought to have the observation. I am returning to London. I shall not come to Wolverberry again. Corisande Pendry. Morena read the letter twice. She folded it. She sat for a long time with her hand flat on it. She rose. She went to the bell. She pulled it once. When Janet appeared, she said, "Tell His Grace that if he wishes to speak with me, I shall be in the small drawing room after supper. And Janet, I shall dress tonight. The green silk and the pearls." Janet curtsied and went. Morena stood for a moment at the window. Somewhere on the London road, at this hour, a traveling carriage was carrying Lady Corisande Pendry back to a life in which the Duchess of Wolverberry was a stranger she had met once and corrected herself about. Morena thought, "She did me a kindness. I shall not forget it." She turned from the window and she began, for the first time in a week, to prepare. She came down at 9. She had dressed with care. The green silk was 3 years old, and it still fit, and the pearls had been her grandmother's. Her husband was in the small drawing room. He rose when she entered. He had also dressed. He had not been required to, and he had done it. "Morena." "Theodoric, will you sit?" "Not yet." She stayed standing. He stayed standing. The room was warm from the fire and very quiet. I have received a letter from Lady Corisande Pendry. She wrote to tell me that she had misjudged the situation here. She wrote to tell me, as plainly as she could, that she was going back to London and would not return. May I ask what she said? You may not. He nodded once. He accepted it. Theodoric, I am going to ask you 3 questions. I should like you to answer them honestly, because I shall know if you do not. Ask. Did you know, when Pendry came to stay, that he was bringing his sister with the hope that you would consider her in my place? I knew he had hopes. I did not know he had plans. Did you encourage the hope? I did not discourage it. That is the most honest answer I have. I did speak to him more than once of the failure of the succession and of my concern about my cousin Rawnsley. I did laugh at jokes I should not have laughed at. I encouraged it, Morena, by not refusing it. That is the truth. And my third question. If I had borne you a son 3 years ago, would we be standing in this room having this conversation? He did not answer at once. He walked slowly to the fire, and he stood with his back to her, with one hand resting on the mantel. No, he said eventually. We would not. Thank you. He turned. His face was hard in a way she had never seen. It was not hard with anger. It was hard with something she did not yet have a word for. Morena, may I ask you something now? What do you want? She had expected the question. I want a year, she said. He looked at her. A year. A year in which I am not required to provide an heir. A year in which you will not come to my room. A year in which we live in this house as two people who are learning one another from the beginning. A year in which I am permitted to read what I wish to read and walk where I wish to walk. At the end of it, if I wish to leave this marriage, I shall leave it. If I wish to remain, I shall remain, and we shall speak again about what remaining is to mean. He was silent for a long moment. A year. Yes. And my cousin. And the succession. You are asking me to set all of that aside for a year? Yes. Why? Because I was brought into this house as an instrument, Theodric, and an instrument is not what I am going to be for the rest of my life. If at the end of the year I decide to give you what you married me for, I shall give it freely, and not because it was a condition of my being kept. If at the end of the year I decide to give you nothing, I shall give you nothing, and I shall leave this house, and you may marry Lady Coruscant or some other young woman with a clean pedigree, and I wish you well of it. He stared at her. Morena, those are my terms. Morena, you are my wife. I am aware. I cannot simply. You can. You can agree, or you can refuse. If you refuse, I shall leave tomorrow for my father's house at Thornhallow. You will lose nothing but the appearance of a wife. You have had little more than that from me as it is. His hand on the mantel had gone white at the knuckles. And if I agree, then we begin tomorrow. Separate rooms, separate hours, courteous in company, honest in private. You will, for 1 year, regard me as a person to whom you happen to be married, and we shall discover whether there is anything between those two descriptions that we wish to keep. He did not answer. The clock on the mantel struck the half-hour. I need, he said at last, to sit down. Sit. He sat. He put his elbows on his knees. He pressed his palms together. I was raised by a father who spoke to my mother once a day at dinner. I was raised to believe that a marriage was a contract, kept in good faith by two parties who did not trouble one another unduly. I married you because my father died and left me a house I could not afford and a cousin I could not stomach. And your father's name was clean and your dowry was large. I did not look at you, Morena. I did not look at you at the altar. I did not look at you at the breakfast table. I knew that you were running my house, and I took it as my due. Then Pendry began to hint this spring that the succession was in question, and I didn't stop it, because it was easier not to stop it. And the library. I was drunk, and I was vain, and I wished to appear to Pendry as a man who had made his peace with his circumstances. I said what I said because it was the kind of thing men say when they wish to sound worldly. I would like to tell you that I did not mean it. I cannot. I meant it at the moment I said it, and by the following morning I had almost forgotten saying it, which is worse. Yes. Then you went quiet. You stopped embroidering in the evenings. You read a treatise on turnips. You played whist like a card sharp, and I found that I was watching you for the first time because I did not know where you had gone. At the Folly, when you walked away with Pendry, I thought, he's going to tell her. I stood on the hill and watched the two of you walk down to the lake, and I thought, when she knows, I am going to lose her. And I did not know, Morena, until that moment, that there was anything of you that I could lose. She could not speak. I did not know it was possible to have been married to a woman for 3 years and to discover her in a single afternoon. You are asking me for a year. I was prepared, when you came down the stairs, to be told you were leaving in the morning. A year is more than I deserve. I accept your terms, Morena, all of them, without condition. She stood very still. She had prepared for refusal. She had prepared for negotiation. She had not prepared for this. Theodric, I did not come down the stairs to hear any of that. I came down to give you terms, not to receive a confession. I know. You will have to say it again another night, when I have had time to decide whether I believe it. I shall say it as many nights as you wish. She sat down, finally, in the chair opposite his. A year, Theodric. A year. And no coming to my door. No. We shall introduce ourselves, Theodric, for 1 year. Then we begin tomorrow. She rose. Thank you for not lying. She did not wait for an answer. She went up the stairs, and she did not look back. She lay in the dark with her eyes open and her hands folded on the coverlet, and she thought, I have been given 1 year. I do not know what I am going to do with it, but I am going to find out. They began the year on a Monday. The house, which had been a stage on which Morena had performed the role of Duchess for 3 years, became over the following weeks a house she was gradually learning to inhabit. She moved her writing desk from the small parlor to the long window of the morning room, where the light was better. She had her old governess's cabinet brought down from the attic, and had its drawers cleaned and lined with fresh paper, and into the drawers she placed the small private collection of objects she had not unpacked when she came as a bride. A pressed fern from her mother's herbarium, a packet of her father's letters tied in faded blue ribbon. The green notebook had not been sent. Her father had written that he could not find it, but that he had set the groom to search the attics. She told herself she did not need the notebook. She began, in any case, a new one. The year settled into a shape. They breakfasted together. They no longer sat in silence. He asked her, one morning in early October, what she was reading, and she told him, and he listened, and he asked 2 questions that were not unintelligent, and when he rose from the table he said, I shall think about the turnips, with no visible irony. And she laughed, once, a real laugh, and he turned at the door and looked at her as though he had been given a gift. They did not dine together in the evenings for the first month. At the beginning of November, on a Tuesday, he sent her a small note at 5 o'clock. If you would care to dine this evening, I shall be in the dining room at 7. If not, not. No answer required. She sent no answer. She went down at 7. He rose when she came in. He only drew out her chair for her, as he had not drawn out her chair in 3 years, and they spoke of the tenant's harvest and the state of the West Road. And she went up to bed at 9, and she slept that night for the first time in many weeks. He did not come to her door. In December, his mother wrote from Bath, asking whether there was any news. He wrote back that there was not. He showed Morena the letter he had sent before he sealed it. It was courteous and brief, and it offered his mother no ground. In January, his cousin Rawnsley came to stay for a week. He was exactly the man her husband had described. He ate prodigiously, drank worse, spoke loudly of his prospects, and inquired of Morena over the port whether she had any news to share with the family. The next morning at breakfast, Theodric said, Rawnsley will not be invited again for the remainder of the year, and she said, It suits me very well, thank you. And they ate their toast in a silence that was no longer the silence of a marriage she had given up on, but the silence of two people who had learned to sit in a room together. In February, she received her father's book. He had published it at last, the small volume on the Latin poets, and he sent her the first copy with a dedication in his own hand. She read it by the fire in the morning room. Her husband sat across from her on the second evening with a book of his own, and she looked up once and found him watching her over the top of his page, and he did not look away when he was caught. He said, "Your father writes beautifully." And she said, "You have read it?" And he said, "I have been reading it as the printer sent down the proofs. He sent the proofs here. He asked me to look through them. I did not tell you because I did not wish to presume." She sat with the book in her lap for a long moment. "Theodric, when did he write to you?" "In October, after your letter to him about the notebook. He is not a fool, your father. He understood that something had shifted. He asked me whether I could be trusted to look after you through a winter. I wrote back that I could not be sure, but that I intended to try. You did not tell me. Why not?" "Because I did not wish you to remain through the winter, because you felt supervised. I wished you to remain, if you remained at all, because you chose to remain." She closed the book. She looked at the fire. "Theodric, come and sit beside me." He came. He did not touch her. He sat on the sofa at a courteous distance, with one hand on his knee, and he waited. She said, "I do not know yet whether I shall stay. I know. I am telling you because the year will end in August, and I do not want you to come to the end of it, believing I have decided, when I have not. Morena, may I tell you something that is not a request? Yes. I should like you to stay. I do not say this to pressure you. I say it because you asked me in September to say such things as I felt, and I have been trying to say them. If you do not, I shall understand. But I should like you to stay." She did not answer. She sat with the book in her lap and his hand, not quite touching hers, very still on his knee beside her, and she looked at the fire for a long time, and she did not give him an answer, and he did not ask her for one. In March, the green notebook arrived from Thornhallow. Her father had found it, at last, in a trunk in the attic, and he sent it by the post with a note that said only, "Yours, dear one." As ever. She opened it in her morning room with the door shut, and she turned the pages slowly. Her own child's handwriting looked up at her, the hawthorn birds she had drawn at 12. Then she went to find her husband. He was in the library. The door was open this time. She stood on the threshold for a moment, because she had not crossed that threshold since the September afternoon, and he looked up from his desk and saw her there, and he understood what it had cost her to come to the door, and he did not make her ask. "Come in, Morena." She came in. She sat down in the chair opposite his desk, and she put the green notebook in front of him. "This is what I was when I was 12. He opened it. He turned the pages with great care. He looked at the drawings, and the notes, and the pressed feather that had been tucked between 2 pages for 13 years. When he had read to the end, he closed the notebook, and he set his hand flat on its cover. "Would you like to make a new one? This year, of the birds here. The park at Wolverberry has better hawthorn than Thornhallow. I have always thought so. I should not interfere. I should not even ask to see it unless you offered. Theodric, I am going to stay." He did not move. He did not move for what felt, to her, like a very long time. Then he said, in a voice that was not quite steady, "I shall tell the groom to have a path cleared to the hawthorn hedge in the morning. Thank you. You need not thank me. I shall thank you when I wish to thank you, Theodric." "Yes." She took the notebook. She stood up. At the door she turned. "There are still 5 months of the year left. I am not ending the year early. I am only telling you what I know at the end of March. I understand." She left the library. She went up to her own rooms, and she sat at her writing desk, and she opened the green notebook to the first blank page, and she took up her pen, and at the top of the page, in her adult hand, she wrote the date. And then she wrote, "A heron in the reeds, at the east end of the lake, motionless for above 20 minutes, silver gray, yellow eye, observing a fish I could not see. It did not mind that I sat on the bench and watched it. A heron does not mind anything, I think, that does not intend to eat it." She smiled at the sentence. She had not written a sentence of her own, in her own hand, for herself, in 3 years. She turned the page. The scandal came in April. It came by way of a newspaper, as such things often do, and it came from London. On the 14th of April, a paragraph appeared in one of the middle-grade papers, under the heading, "Society Notes." It did not name anyone outright. It referred to a certain Duke of W. and his friend Lord P., and a remarkable conversation said to have taken place in the library of a great northern house. The paragraph was short. It was also unmistakable to anyone who had been in town the previous summer. It said, in substance, that the Duke of Wolverbury had been overheard speaking of his wife as a broodmare, that Lord Pendry had introduced his sister into the house with a view to an eventual replacement, and that the Duchess had discovered the conspiracy and was now living separately from her husband in the north. The paragraph closed with the observation that the Duke's cousin is said to be in cheerful spirits. Morena read it at breakfast. Theodoric had read it before her. She could see that he had read it, because the paper was folded beside his plate in a way he never folded a paper. He rose when she sat down. "There is something in the paper this morning you should see." "I have seen it. Janet told me. The servants have been reading it since dawn." "Of course." "Sit down, Theodoric." He sat down. "Who wrote it?" he said. "I do not know." "Pendry?" "No, Pendry would not." "His sister, then?" "No. She wrote to me in September. She is not the one." "Then who?" "I should say Rawnsley. He was here in January. He heard enough. He guessed the rest." "Rawnsley." "It does not matter, Theodoric. It is in the paper. By the end of this week it will be in every paper. The question is not who wrote it. The question is what we do now." He did not answer at once. "Morena, I am sorry for this." "I know. It is half your doing. The other half is Rawnsley's. We all have a share. Do not try to carry all of it. I shall give you an hour. I shall be in the morning room." She rose. She went to the morning room, and she sat by the window. She did not read. She looked out at the long green park in the April light, and she thought. She had lived through a worse thing than the paragraph in the paper. She had lived through the library door. The paragraph was only the library door repeated in public. After an hour, he came to the morning room. He did not sit. He stood near the door with his hands behind his back. "I have considered. I should like to take you to London. I should like to present you in London as my wife. I should like to attend 3 balls with you in 1 week. I should like the paragraph in the paper to be rendered, by the testimony of several hundred witnesses, a lie. And I should like to do something else, which I have been wanting to do since October." "What?" "I have written to my solicitor. I have asked him to draw up a document. The document alters the terms of the settlement under which we were married. The present terms provide that, should I die without a male heir, the estate passes to my cousin, Rawnsley. The new document provides that in such an event, Wolverbury Court and the greater portion of the income shall pass to you, outright and without entail, for your lifetime. Rawnsley shall inherit the title, which I cannot prevent, and a small sum, which will prevent him from starving. These shall be yours." She stared at him. "Theodoric." "I have not signed it. I have not signed it because the decision of the year is yours, and I didn't wish to make a gesture that could be read as pressure. But the document is drawn. I am not asking you to go to London as the keeper of my name. I am asking you to go there as my wife, which is a different thing, which you have not previously been permitted to be." She could not for a moment speak. "Say something, Morena." "Sit down, Theodric." He sat. "You have been writing to solicitors since October." "Yes. I did not want you to believe, when you made your decision in August, that you were making it under the weight of a gift. A gift is a form of pressure, too. I wanted the gift to exist, in case you chose to stay. I wanted it not to be visible to you, in case you chose to leave." She began unexpectedly to laugh. She had not laughed in front of her husband in all the years of her marriage. She laughed now, quietly, with her hand over her mouth. Theodric watched her laugh. He did not smile. He only watched her with a very steady attention, as though he were trying to memorize the sound of it in case it did not come again. "Theodric, we shall go to London, and you shall sign the document, and we shall send the entire deed, by quiet channels, to 3 people in London who are incapable of keeping a secret. That will accomplish the purpose, and it will not put your solicitor's name in print." "Morena, who taught you to think like that?" "You did, Theodric, in the last 7 months, not by instruction, by example." He was silent. "We shall leave on Monday, and Theodric, at some point in London, you are going to have to stand beside me and be asked directly, by some old woman with too much jewelry, whether the story in the paper is true. You will not lie. You will say, 'There was a conversation my wife overheard, which I regret more than anything I have said in my adult life, and she has forgiven me further than I deserve, and I should prefer to speak of something else.' You have thought about this. I've had the time. I shall be upstairs. I have letters to write." She rose and she went to the door. At the door, she turned. "Theodric, I have decided in the last quarter of an hour that I shall stay. I was going to tell you in August. I am telling you in April, because I don't wish to go to London on a false footing. I am not staying because of the document. I am not staying because of the newspaper. I am staying because you wrote to solicitors in October without telling me, and because my father sent the proofs here and you did not speak of it, and because you had a path cleared to the hawthorn hedge in a morning. I am staying because I find that I am married to a different man from the one whose laugh I heard through the library door." They were in London by Tuesday evening. The townhouse in Grosvenor Square had been opened and aired in a single day by a staff expecting them in June. Morena went up to her rooms, bathed, dressed in her dark blue evening gown, and came down to find her husband in the drawing room with 2 newspapers open on the table and a third folded in his hand. 3 of them now, the Chronicle and the Post, and one I do not know the name of. Good. Good. If it had been 1, we could have ignored it. 3 is too many to ignore. It forces us to act. He set the papers aside. "There is a ball tomorrow night at Lady Hertringham's. She has renewed the invitation with a private note. She wishes us to come. Lady Hertringham is the worst gossip in London." "Yes." "Then we shall go." They went. The ballroom at Hertringham House was filled that night with every person in town who had read the paragraph and every person who had been told about it. Morena entered on her husband's arm in her dark blue gown, with her grandmother's pearls at her throat, and she felt the wave of the room's attention move across her, and she did not flinch. Theodric did not let go of her arm. He did not let go of it for the whole of the evening. She had not asked him not to. He simply did not. He stood beside her in the receiving line, and he stood beside her when she was presented to Lady Hertringham, and he stood beside her when the old Duchess of Marlsby came across the room with her stick and her diamonds, and asked, in the voice of a woman who had never been refused an answer in 80 years, "Wolverberry, is the story in the papers true?" The ballroom, without appearing to, went quiet. Theodric answered precisely as Morena had composed his answer for him a week earlier. "There was a conversation which my wife overheard. I regret it more than anything I have said in my adult life. She has forgiven me further than I deserve, and I should prefer to speak of something else." The old Duchess looked at him. She looked at Morena. She looked back at him. She said. She turned away, and she walked, slowly, across the ballroom to a knot of her contemporaries, and she spoke to them in a low voice for perhaps a minute, and within 10 minutes, the answer had traveled across the room on the feet of footmen and the fans of dowagers. And by the end of the night, the story had changed in the telling from the Duchess of Wolverberry is living separately from her husband. In the north to the Duke of Wolverberry, disgraced himself in his own library, and his wife has taken him firmly in hand, and he is, by all accounts, deeply sorry. These are different stories. The first destroys a marriage. The second furnishes drawing rooms for a season. Morena understood the difference. So did her husband. At 2 a.m. they came home. He handed her down from the carriage. He walked her up the steps. In the hall, he dismissed the footman. "Will you sit with me for a moment before you go up?" "Yes." They went into the small library at the back of the house. He closed the door. He did not sit. He stood by the fire, and she sat on the small sofa. "Morena, may I say something?" "Yes." "I have been in love with you since the end of October. I did not know it in October. I knew it in January when Ronsley was here, and I saw him look at you across the dinner table, and I understood that I would kill him before I let him inherit this house. I did not say it in January because I was afraid. I did not say it in February because I was ashamed. I did not say it in March because you had not yet told me you were staying, and I did not want the saying of it to become a reason you stayed. I did not say it in April because we were fighting a paragraph. I am saying it tonight because I have stood beside you for 4 hours in a ballroom, and I have understood that it would be a cowardice beyond any other cowardice of mine if I didn't say it tonight. I am in love with my wife. I do not know whether she wishes to hear it. I only know that it is true, and that I will not keep it from her another night." She did not move. She did not speak. He understood after a moment. "You do not need to answer, Morena. I did not say it to require an answer. I shall go up." "No," he stopped. "Come and sit." He came. He sat at the far end of the sofa, his hands on his knees, his eyes on the fire. He did not touch her. "Theodric, I do not know yet whether I am in love with you. I want to tell you the truth about that. I do not know. I have watched you for 7 months, and I have found a man I respect, and I have found a man I trust, and I have found a man I am beginning to find necessary, which is a separate thing from love, and may not become it. But I will tell you what I know. When you stood beside me in that ballroom tonight, and did not let go of my arm, I felt, for the first time in my life, that I was not alone in a room. I came home with you tonight, and I did not want to go up to my own rooms. I am sitting on this sofa, and you are sitting at the other end of it, and I do not want you to move any further away, and I also do not, yet, want you any nearer. We agreed in September that we would not lie to one another in this marriage, and I do not intend to break that agreement tonight on the matter that matters most." He did not speak. He did not move. "Thank you for telling me," he said at last. "Thank you for not asking me to say more than I know. I would not. I know. I am only noting it. Morena, shall I go up?" She thought about it. "Stay a little longer. Only sit. Do not come closer. Only sit." He sat. They did not speak for a long time. She put out her hand along the back of the sofa. She did not look at him. He put his hand out, very slowly, along the back of the sofa as well. Their fingers did not touch. They lay an inch apart on the dark silk of the cushion, and they stayed there, unmoving, until the fire had gone to embers. When she rose, She rose first. He rose with her. At the door of the library, she turned. Theodric, in August, when the year ends, I shall come to your door. Not before. Do you understand? Yes. Good night. Good night, Morena. She went up. In her own room, she took off the pearls and set them in their case, and she sat in her nightdress on the edge of the bed in the firelight, and she thought, he is in love with me. I do not know what I shall do with it. I have 4 months in which to find out. She blew out the candle. The year ended on a Monday in August, and the year did not end at all, because by August, the year had become the shape of their life. She came to his door on the Monday evening. She came in her nightdress and her wrapper, with her hair loose on her shoulders, and she knocked, and he opened the door, and he did not speak. He only stepped back, and she came in, and she closed the door behind her. I have come to keep the promise I made to you in April, he said. Morena. I am in love with you, Theodric. I know it at last. I have known it since June, and I didn't tell you, because I wanted to be sure, and I have been sure for 2 months, and I wanted to come to you on the right night, and the right night was tonight. He put his hand out. She took it. He drew her to him, and he put his arms around her, and he held her for a long time without speaking, and she felt his face in her hair, and she felt, for the first time in her life, that she had come home to a house she had chosen. 2 years passed. They were not simple years. They were the years of a marriage being made, rather than a marriage being performed. They argued a few times about small things, and 1 or 2 large ones. They were reconciled each time by the habit, now deeply formed, of not lying to one another. She wrote in the green notebook and in 3 new ones a record of the birds in the park that would, many years later, be published in a small private edition. Their son was born in the 3rd spring. He was a quiet, solemn baby, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's considering mouth, and he was christened at Wolverbury in a small ceremony. His godmother was Lady Corisande Pendry, who had married, the year before, a widowed baronet in Herefordshire. He was called Ambrose, after Morena's mother's father. The cousin Rawnsley did not attend. He had, by this time, been so thoroughly ruined by his own reputation in London that he had removed to Dublin. On the evening of the christening, after the guests had gone and the baby was asleep in the nursery, Theodric found his wife in the morning room. She was sitting by the window with the green notebook open in her lap. She was only looking out at the long gold light of the August evening and at the hawthorn hedge beyond the lawn, where the year's fledglings were making their small, determined flights from branch to branch. He came and stood behind her chair and put his hands on her shoulders. She put her hand up over his. Theodric, do you remember the afternoon I came into the library and put the green notebook on your desk? I remember every moment of it. You asked me whether I should like to make a new one, of the birds here. Yes. I have made 4. I know. I was thinking, just now, that on that afternoon I did not know I should stay. I had told you I should stay, an hour before, but I had not quite believed it of myself yet. I cannot remember now, the moment I truly decided. I suspect there was no moment. I suspect I was deciding, every day of that year, and for some time afterward, and perhaps am deciding still. You are still deciding. She smiled at the window. Every day, Theodric. Does that trouble you? No, it reassures me. A wife who has decided once and for all does not need to look at her husband again. She laughed softly. There is something I have been meaning to ask you. Do you remember what you said to Aldrich Pendry in the library? The exact phrase. He was silent. I do. Say it. I want to hear it said in this room. I want to hear it spoken by you. Here. Now. In the house our son was christened in this afternoon. I want it to be said, and finished, and put away. he said quietly. I will keep her until she bears a son. You were wrong, Theodric. I know. You did not keep me. I stayed. I know. And I did not bear you a son. I bore us one. Yes. And I shall keep you, Theodric, if you will consent to be kept. For as long as we are granted, on those terms, and no others. He bent his head. He put his cheek against the top of her hair. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was not quite steady. On those terms, Morena. Good. And no others. Good. They stayed there for a long time, she in the chair by the window, with the green notebook open in her lap. He behind the chair with his hands on her shoulders. And outside the long August light slowly deepened over the park, and a single heron, silver in the failing sun, lifted from the reeds at the east end of the lake, and flew, unhurried and certain of its direction, toward the darker trees beyond the hawthorn hedge. Thank you for staying with Morena and Theodric through all of it. Their story began with a sentence she was never meant to hear, a sentence that reduced her to an instrument and awaiting time. But the truth of any marriage is not what is said behind a library door. The truth is what is chosen afterward, in the daylight, by two people who agree to begin again. She did not wait to be kept. She asked for a year. She used it. And when the year ended, she chose him, on her own terms, in her own time. If this story moved you, please subscribe and ring the bell, because there are more stories waiting. More women who overheard what they were never meant to hear. More men who had to earn the right to be heard in return. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist.